Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep into a world full of dice rolls
hmm
and all that awesome stuff, tabletop RPGs, and wow, you guys really gave us a lot to work with on this topic.
Yeah, you weren't kidding. It seems like you're really interested in how the mechanics of these games have, changed over time, how
Ugh,
they've evolved.
definitely. I'm so curious about how different games handle character creation and combat and how they tell stories.
Yeah.
There's just so much out there. Like, I vaguely remember my brother playing D&D when we were kids, but then there are all these new games that sound like, I don't know, interactive novels almost.
It's a whole world to discover. So today we'll kind of be your guides through all of it, showing you how things have changed from those classic dungeon crawler type games to the really narrative focused ones and even some more experimental stuff too.
That sounds like a blast.
Yeah.
So, where do we even start with all this?
Well, let's go back to the beginning. Those traditional game mechanics that, really form the foundation for everything that came later. You're probably familiar with the whole idea of classes and levels, right?
Yeah, I get the basics. Like, you got your fighters, your wizards, all that stuff. And they have their stats, right? To tell you how good they are at things.
Exactly. Just like in classic D&D, each character has those numbers that represent their strength, dexterity, intelligence, all that. And to do anything in the game, like swinging a sword or picking a lock, you roll a die, usually that iconic 20-sided die, and add your relevant stat. The Dungeon Master, or GM, sets a target number, and you have to meet or beat it to succeed.
Okay, so that's where those dice rolls come in. But it's not just D&D that uses that, right?
Oh, not even close. There are so many other systems out there. Some, like RuneQuest or Traveler, use percentile dice. So you roll a D100 and try to get under your skill percentage.
So, like, if I have a 70% chance to hit something with my bow and arrow, I need to roll 70 or lower.
That's it. And then there are dice pool systems, like the one in Vampire, the Masquerade. In those, you roll a bunch of dice, depending on how skilled you are, and then you count how many meet or beat a target number.
Huh, interesting. So many ways to use those dice. But what's the main, I guess, the philosophy behind all these different traditional systems?
At the heart of it, it's about simulating a world in detail. They want to create consistent rules that kind of model reality, but with, a fantasy twist. Things like hit points, they represent how much damage you can take. Armor class shows how hard you are to hit, and each skill gives you a specific chance of succeeding.
So it's all about making a believable world with its own logic.
Exactly. And there are advantages to this approach. One of the big ones is tactical depth. There's a real sense of mastery you get when you understand the rules and how to use them to your advantage.
Like a strategy game.
Yeah, think of it like chess. Every move has consequences, and a skilled player can really outsmart their opponent.
So these games are for people who like to think ahead, be strategic.
Absolutely. Plus, you have clear-cut rules, so there's a sense of fairness and predictability. You know your odds when you roll the dice, and everyone is playing on a level playing field. It's great for those long campaigns where you see characters grow and level up and get stronger.
Yeah, like watching your character go from zero to hero.
Right. But of course, this approach also has its drawbacks. One of the biggest criticisms is the complexity. The rule books can be huge, and it takes time for new players to learn everything.
Yeah, that could be intimidating for someone who's just starting out.
Definitely. And sometimes all those rules lead to what we call rules lawyering, where players are more focused on arguing about tiny details than, actually playing the game and telling a story.
Ugh, yeah. I bet that could kill the fun pretty quick.
For sure. And those detailed rules can slow down the game sometimes. Like in a really tense negotiation scene, imagine having the fate of the kingdom decided by one persuasion roll. Doesn't feel very dramatic, right?
Yeah, it seems like the mechanics are getting in the way of the story there.
Right. And that's a key criticism of traditional games. They can
Mm.
sometimes focus too much on simulation and not enough on the story itself.
So if you really like digging into complex systems and strategizing, traditional RPGs could be perfect for you. But if you find those rules-heavy games a bit too much, or you want something that's more free-flowing and story-driven,
Well, then maybe the narrative revolution is more your speed.
narrative revolution, huh? Okay, I'm definitely interested, but like, what actually makes these games so different?
Well, they're all about putting the story first. Instead of trying to be a super realistic simulation, they really focus on crafting a good narrative and exploring the characters, letting the story unfold more naturally.
So less about number crunching and more about telling a good story.
Exactly. And to do that, they often use mechanics that give the players a lot more agency, a lot more control over where the story goes.
Okay, I like that idea. Can you give me an example? Like, how does that work in a game?
Sure. Let's look at Powered by the Apocalypse games. sometimes called PDTA for short. It's a really popular framework for a ton of different games in all sorts of genres.
I've heard of PBTA, but I'm not really sure I get it.
So the core of it is this idea of moves. Instead of just rolling to see if you succeed at something, you describe what your character is doing, and the GM decides which move fits that description. Each move has specific triggers and outcomes that help drive the story.
So instead of saying, like, I use my diplomacy skill, I would say something like, I try to convince the guard to let us pass by, appealing to their sense of duty.
Yeah, exactly. And then the GM would be like, okay, that sounds like the parlay move. Roll 2d6 and add your charm. And the result isn't just a simple yes or no, success or failure. PBTA uses a three-tiered system, right? So on a 10 or higher, it's a complete success. On a 7 and 9, you succeed, but there's a complication. And on a 6 or lower, things go sideways, and the GM introduces some kind of twist or setback.
Huh, that's cool. So even when you fail, it moves the story forward.
Yeah, it's this fail-forward idea. It keeps things exciting and unpredictable. Even when things don't go your way, it just creates more interesting opportunities for the story.
So PBTA is all about giving players more control over what happens.
It is. It's not just about what happens to your character, but also the choices you make and how those choices impact the world.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this narrative approach works. But what about other systems? I've heard of things like Forged in the Dark and Fate Core. Are they similar?
Well, every system has its own style, but they share that focus on narrative and player choice. Forged in the Dark, or FIT-D, often focuses on a specific theme like heists or dungeon crawling or, running a criminal organization. They're known for their structured play and mechanics that encourage teamwork and dealing with surprises.
So they're a bit more structured than PBTA, but still very story-focused.
Exactly. And one of the cool things about FIT-D is how they use stress as a resource. When your character is in a dangerous or stressful situation, they can spend stress to avoid something bad, push themselves further, or even trigger special abilities.
So the stress isn't just like a story element. It's actually part of the mechanics.
Yeah. It creates this strategic layer to the game. Do you play it safe or push your luck and risk burning out?
I like that. It makes you think about your character's mental state and how it affects them. What about Fate Core? What makes that system stand out?
Fate Core is really all about collaborative storytelling and flexible mechanics. So instead of those traditional stats, it uses aspects, which are basically phrases that describe your character's personality, their relationships, their history.
So instead of having a strength score, I might have an aspect that's like strong as an ox or nimble as a cat.
Right. And those aspects aren't just flavor text, they actually matter mechanically. You can invoke them to get bonuses, and the GM can use them to create complications.
So your personality and history directly affect how you play the game.
Yep. And it lets players be really creative and have more input into the story. Fate Core also uses a pretty simple dice system with 4 dice, and the results are modified by those aspects we talked about.
It sounds like narrative games offer a totally different experience than those traditional systems we talked about.
It's really cool how the mechanics are built to support the story and give players more control.
For sure. And it shows how creative game designers are. They're always coming up with new ways to make RPGs more engaging and immersive.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered traditional, we've covered narrative, you've mentioned these hybrid systems. But before we get into those, I think we need to take a little detour, explore this old school Renaissance thing I keep hearing about. What's so appealing about going back to those older games? So old school Renaissance, it's like stepping back in time, right? What's the deal with all the hype around these older games?
Well, it's not just nostalgia, although, there's definitely some of that too. The old school Renaissance, OSR for short, is all about recapturing the feel of those early RPGs, like the original Dungeons and Dragons from way back in the 70s and 80s.
So like platform shoes and disco balls, but for RPGs.
Haha. Yeah, kind of. But there's more to it than that. OSR games really emphasize player skill and creativity rather than super complicated rules and character builds. They're big on what they call rulings, not rules. That means the GM is encouraged to make decisions on the fly using common sense and the spirit of the game.
So less about sticking to a rigid rule book and more about going with the flow. That sounds kind of cool, actually.
It can be really freeing, and you see this philosophy in how OSR games are designed. They usually have way simpler mechanics and much shorter rulebooks compared to modern games. Some even fit on just one page. That means quicker character creation, faster gameplay, and more room for everyone to just improvise.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal, but what about combat in these games? I've heard it can be brutal.
That's true. Combat in OSR games is usually fast, deadly, and pretty unpredictable. Characters can get taken out with one good hit, and yeah, death is a real possibility. It might sound harsh, but it creates a different kind of tension. Every decision matters more, you know? Even small encounters can have big consequences.
So the stakes are always high.
Exactly. It's a completely different vibe from a lot of modern games where characters are tougher and don't die as easily.
Yeah, I can see how that would be exciting for some players, but maybe not everyone's cup of tea. But why are these old school games suddenly popular again? Is it just nostalgia, or is there something more to it?
Well, nostalgia's part of it for sure. A lot of gamers who played those classic D&D editions when they were younger, they have these great memories of those simpler, more dangerous games. But there's also a new appreciation for how elegant and flexible those old systems are. They give players a lot of creativity and freedom, and they don't bog you down with a million rules.
So it's like rediscovering the magic of those early RPG experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And for new players, who might be intimidated by all the rules in modern games, OSR games are a great starting point. They're easy to learn, quick to play, and give you a taste of that classic dungeon crawling fun.
Okay, so that's traditional, narrative, hybrid, and even old school. Wow. But you mentioned some games are just like totally breaking the mold. Let's talk about indie and experimental RPGs. What makes them so different?
These games are all about pushing the limits of what an RPG can even be. They try new mechanics, explore different themes, and challenge all the usual assumptions we have about role-playing.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more. Where do we even begin with all that?
Well, one of the most radical things I've seen is diceless games. Like the name says, they just get rid of dice entirely and use other ways to create uncertainty and drive the story.
Wait, no dice? How does that even work? Isn't rolling dice like the whole point of RPGs?
I know, right? It sounds crazy, but it opens up so many possibilities. One of the earliest examples is Amber Diceless role-playing. In that game, success is all about comparing your character's stats and thinking through the story logically.
So instead of rolling to persuade someone, I might describe my character like making this really powerful speech, appealing to their emotions or something.
Exactly. And the GM would decide if you're successful based on how you describe it and your character's stats. There are other diceless games that use cards, points, or even abstract ideas like emotions to figure out what happens.
Whoa, that's really different. What are the good and bad things about doing it that way?
Well, one big advantage is that it puts all the focus on the narrative. Without dice rolls, the story unfolds in a more organic way, based on the characters and their choices. Some players love that. They feel like they have more control when it's not all up to chance.
I can see that. But doesn't that put a lot of pressure on the GM, to be fair?
That's true, yeah. Diceless games really need a skilled and experienced GM who can make good judgments and keep things moving. But when it's done well, it can be a really amazing experience.
Okay, I'm definitely willing to try it.
Yeah.
What about card-based RPGs? I love card games.
Oh, those can be so much fun. They use cards in all sorts of ways, from determining what happens to inspiring role-playing to setting the mood.
Got any examples?
One that's really popular is Dread. It's a horror RPG, and get this, they use a Jenga tower instead of dice.
A Jenga tower. What? I need to hear more about this.
It's brilliant. Every time your character does something risky, you pull a block from the tower, and if it falls, your character, well, something bad happens.
Oh, wow, I bet that's intense. You can just feel the tension building as the tower gets more and more wobbly.
Exactly. It's perfect for a horror game because it really captures that feeling of like being on edge and not knowing what's going to happen next.
That's such a cool idea. Are there any other games that use cards in creative ways?
Tons. Deadlands, which is a weird West RPG, uses poker hands for things like initiative and resolving actions. It has a whole gambling element to the game. And then there's Castle Falkenstein, which is a steampunk fantasy game. They use a normal deck of cards to do everything because, Victorian gentlemen wouldn't be caught dead rolling dice.
I love that. It's like the mechanics become part of the world itself.
Right. And designers are always coming up with new ways to use cards. Some use custom decks with special art and rules, while others use tarot cards or playing cards or even index cards.
So creative. It really shows you there are no limits in RPGs. But there's one last category. I'm super curious about those games without a game master.
Ah, yes. The GM-less games. They're also called freeform or narrative games. In these games, everyone works together to shape the story, so there's no one person in charge.
So it's like a group storytelling session.
Exactly. One that's super popular is called Fiasco. It's all about telling stories of, well, fiascos. Ambitious plans gone wrong. Everyone works together to set up the scene and make choices, and it usually ends in chaos and hilarious consequences.
Okay, that sounds amazing. How does it even work without a GM?
Well, Fiasco uses dice and prompts to keep things structured. Players take turns setting up situations for each other, and the dice determine the outcomes, which are often totally unexpected.
So you just embrace the chaos and let the story go where it wants.
Yep. And there are other GM-less games out there, too, that explore different themes and mechanics. Like there's Microscope, where you build the history of a fictional world together, and The Quiet Year, where you use cards to guide you through a year of rebuilding after some disaster.
These games sound like a great way to be creative and try different ways of telling stories.
They are, and they're perfect for people who love collaborating and creating stories as a group.
Wow, this has been incredible. We've covered so much ground, from the very first D&D games to these super experimental indie games. It's amazing to see how much variety and creativity there is in the world of RPGs.
I know. And we've only scratched the surface. There are new games coming out all the time, constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
So to everyone listening, whether you're a total RPG newbie or you've been playing for years, my advice is to just go out there and explore. Try different systems, different styles, and find what you love.
And remember, the most important thing is playing with people you enjoy spending time with. So grab your friends, pick a game that sparks your imagination, and get ready for an adventure.
Couldn't said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of tabletop RPGs. Until next time, happy gaming.